Have you ever been told you don't belong, only to rise so high they had no choice but to notice? This is the story of a self-made designer who walked into the Met Gala uninvited and left as the night's biggest name. Ready to feel inspired? Let's get into it. The lights of the Met Gala were blinding. Thousands of bulbs firing off like fireworks as the fashion elite arrived one by one, stepping out of black SUVs into a sea of velvet ropes and camera flashes. Names like Zendaya, Rihanna, and Gigi echoed in the air as the paparazzi screamed for poses and designers whispered about silhouettes. But then, something unusual happened. A woman, unknown to most in attendance, stepped confidently onto the iconic carpeted steps. Her dress shimmered like liquid obsidian, sculpted to perfection, with bold gold accents that crowned her shoulders like armor. Every seam was intentional, every detail daring. But it wasn't just the gown that caught attention. It was her. Her presence was undeniable. She didn't walk. She commanded the space. And that's when it happened. Two security guards moved in fast, too fast. They didn't ask her name. They didn't question her credentials. One tapped her on the shoulder while the other blocked her path. "Ma'am, this section is for invited guests only," the first said, voice laced with authority. The woman, poised and unfazed, tilted her head. "I am a guest," she replied coolly, reaching into her clutch. But before she could retrieve anything, the second guard stepped in. "We're going to need you to step aside," he interrupted. "We don't want to make a scene." But a scene was already beginning to form. Photographers began lowering their cameras, sensing the tension. Stylists and fashion editors nearby exchanged glances. Who was this woman in the show-stopping gown? Why were they trying to remove her? She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood her ground, eyes steady, heart pounding. But in the chaos, one camera stayed fixed on her, noticing what others hadn't yet realized. A reporter from a small fashion podcast whispered to her colleague, "Wait a second, I've seen that design before." And just like that, a fuse was lit. The carpet, the crowd, the moment, it was all about to explode. Because the woman they were trying to escort out was the very designer whose work was quietly redefining the future of fashion. And the world was seconds away from finding out. The moment the guard touched her arm again, something shifted. Not in her. She remained composed, regal even. But in the air. A ripple went through the crowd. Phones came down. Conversations paused. All eyes drifted toward the confrontation. The dress shimmered under the Met Gala lights, an architectural masterpiece of midnight silk and golden thread. Its lines told a story, one not born in a Parisian atelier or backed by million-dollar campaigns. It was raw, radiant, revolutionary. And slowly, the crowd began to notice. A stylist with a clipboard froze. Her eyes widened. "Wait, I know that dress," she muttered. "That's not designer archive. That's new." A blogger near the velvet rope grabbed her phone and zoomed in, voice shaky with excitement. "No, no way, that's Sarai Jordan's work. That has to be her." Whispers swept the carpet like wildfire. Sarai Jordan, the indie designer whose sketches had quietly taken over Black Twitter. The one who created gowns in her Brooklyn apartment by candlelight during power outages. The one whose designs were worn by Solange at an unannounced museum shoot last fall, launching her into cult status overnight without ever being formally accepted by the fashion elite. And now, here she was, on their carpet, wearing her own creation, with no team, no PR badge, and, according to security, no invitation. Still, her presence couldn't be denied. Her look was too bold to ignore. One shoulder framed by a molten gold sculpture, the other elegantly bare. Her gown trailed behind her like ink poured on marble, every step a brushstroke. A camera finally clicked, then another, then 100. Suddenly the press line came alive, shouting, scrambling, refocusing lenses. "Sarai, over here! Can we get a full-body shot? Who are you wearing?" She turned slowly, a subtle smirk lifting the edge of her lips. "I designed it myself." The security guard looked confused. The cameras looked hungry. She wasn't just wearing a dress. She was making history. And as the energy around her swelled, it became clear the Met Gala had a new star tonight, and no velvet rope was going to keep her from shining. Long before the flashbulbs, the chants, or the chants of her name, Sarai Jordan was just another name crossed off a guest list. She remembered it clearly. 3 months before the Met Gala, she sat alone at her sewing table in a cramped walk-up apartment in Bed-Stuy. The space doubled as her studio and tripled as her bedroom. The walls were plastered with fabric swatches, torn-out magazine covers, and pinned sketches. Some finished, others smudged with tears. She had applied to design for the gala's theme, Divinity in Design. She pitched a collection rooted in ancestral Black royalty, modern silhouettes infused with the spirit of ancient regality, beaded cowries, gold filigree, silk that moved like smoke. The committee's response? Silence. No email. No callback. No press invite. Not even a rejection. Instead, she watched on Instagram as less talented, better connected designers were tapped to dress the stars. Sarai's friends told her to wait for her time, but Sarai had waited long enough. If the fashion world wasn't going to give her a seat at the table, she'd build her own and wear it into the ballroom. So she began sewing. For months, she turned down commissions and poured her savings into one gown. That gown. A couture masterpiece with gold leaf detailing she forged herself using antique molding tools. She learned metallurgy from YouTube, studied Black empires from the 12th century, and stitched until her fingers bled. Every element of that dress told a story. Her story and the story of women like her, erased from the archives of high fashion. Women whose style was stolen and repackaged. Women whose names were left out of credit lines and campaigns. And when the dress was complete, she didn't mail it to a celebrity or post it online for likes. She wore it, herself. She took a cab to the gala, stepped out in heels that scraped the last dollars from her bank account, and walked that carpet, without permission, without validation, without fear. Because she didn't need anyone to announce her arrival. She was the moment, and the very people who once ignored her, they were about to learn her name the hard way. The murmurs on the carpet were rising now, the air electric, the tension undeniable. Sarai stood like a monument at the center of it all, a living sculpture in obsidian and gold. Cameras clicked like ticking clocks. Stylists huddled, influencers whispered into their phones. But the two security guards didn't care about any of that. They cared about protocol, and protocol said she wasn't on the list. "Ma'am," the taller one said, stepping forward again, now clearly irritated. "We've asked you once. This is your final warning." Before Sarai could answer, a voice from behind a press barricade cut through the tension. "Yo, that's Sarai Jordan." Heads turned. A fashion podcaster with purple hair was waving her phone in the air. "That's her. She's the one who made that custom suit for Solange. The one that glowed in UV lighting at the MoMA shoot." The guard blinked. "Who?" "Sarai Jordan," she repeated louder this time. "She's the designer. That dress she's wearing, she made it." Another person chimed in. "She's the one who reworked funeral fabrics into runway couture last year. Went viral for that tribute to her grandmother." Security hesitated, but just for a second. Protocol said no badge, no wristband, no handler. That meant removal. "She's not credentialed," one of them muttered into his radio. "We need to escort her out, now." Sarai inhaled deeply, not out of fear, but fury, because she'd seen this story play out before. A Black woman unrecognized, uninvited, unwelcome. She turned to face them fully, dress pooling like molten midnight around her feet. "I am the designer," she said, voice low but cutting, "and you're going to regret putting your hands on me." But the guards were already moving. That's when a camera crew, major network, turned its lens toward her. A boom mic swung into position, and just behind the crowd, a figure in a head-to-toe Valentino gown froze, eyes locking on Sarai. A-list, influential, and very, very familiar with Sarai's work. Her lips parted, because she realized something no one else did yet. This wasn't just a fashion moment, it was a reckoning. At first, the voices were scattered, A few raised brows, a whisper here, a gasp there. But like the slow roll of thunder before a storm, momentum was building. A-list actress Nia Ramsey, draped in crimson Valentino, stepped off the carpet and made a beeline toward the unfolding scene. Her heels clicked with purpose. She didn't hesitate. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, voice sharp enough to cut through couture. One of the guards turned, startled. "Ma'am, this woman is not an invited guest. She's Sarai Jordan," Nia snapped, eyes narrowing. "She designed this year's most talked-about concept, and you're trying to drag her off like she's trespassing?" Another celebrity turned, then another. Stylists dropped their phones. Paparazzi angled their lenses. It was no longer just about a dress. It was about who gets to belong and who decides. The crowd shifted. "Yo, that's her!" "She's the one who flipped Kente into a full opera cape last year." "I thought she couldn't get in." "She said she was blacklisted." And then came the chant. It started small. A soft voice from somewhere near the velvet ropes. "Sarai, Sarai." Then louder. "Sarai, Sarai." Within seconds, the crowd, stylists, models, makeup artists, even some press, was in unison. "Sarai, Sarai, Sarai." The guards froze, not because of the noise, but because of who was now watching. Behind them, gala co-chair and global fashion icon Marcella Dupont had appeared at the top of the steps, flanked by a PR handler. Her expression was unreadable, but her message was not. She made a swift slicing gesture with her hand. The head of security's earpiece crackled. Then, "Stand down!" Immediately, the guards dropped their hands. Sarai didn't move. Not yet. She stood still in the storm of applause and chants, eyes sweeping the crowd like a queen surveying her kingdom. Her kingdom. And as the voices around her swelled, one thing became crystal clear. They didn't just want her there. They needed her there. Because in a room full of borrowed brilliance, she was the only one who brought her own. The chanting didn't stop. It rose wave after wave until it crashed over the red carpet like a declaration. "Sarai, Sarai, Sarai." For the first time that night, the Met Gala didn't belong to the stars or their stylists. It belonged to the woman they tried to escort out, Sarai Jordan. And now everyone knew her name. Security stepped back, heads down, avoiding eye contact as whispers flooded their earpieces. PR reps scrambled to identify how this could have happened. Phones pinged, messages flew, hashtags formed. Oriyurda Sarai Jordan. She is the moment. Shak Met Gala history. A fashion reporter shoved her mic toward Sarai. "Who are you wearing?" Sarai tilted her chin. "Myself." The reporter blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "I designed this gown, every thread, every detail. It's mine." Her voice was calm, unwavering, cutting through the noise like silk through steel. "And I belong here, not because I was invited, but because my work earned it." Flashbulbs fired. Cameramen turned. That one line was already being clipped and captioned for TikTok and Vogue's IG reel. Sarai began to walk again. Not escorted this time, but escorted by attention. A ripple of awe followed every step. Photographers yelled her name like it was a brand they finally understood. Celebrities turned their heads. Some even clapped. And at the base of the steps, waiting like an unspoken acknowledgement, stood Marcella Dupont. She extended her hand. "I've been following your work," Marcella said quietly, barely audible over the chaos. "I didn't know you'd be joining us tonight, but I'm glad you did." Sarai looked at the hand for a beat, then shook it, not out of gratitude, but out of power, because now they weren't doing her a favor. They were trying to catch up. As she ascended the famous steps of the Met, with cameras capturing every regal stride, someone in the press box whispered, "She's not a guest anymore." Another added, "She's the main event." And the world, watching from every screen and every feed, knew they had just witnessed a shift, not just in fashion, but in who gets to define it. The heavy glass doors of the MET closed behind her, muting the chants outside like a curtain falling after the first act. Inside, the air was thick with opulence, chandeliers glittering like stardust, violins echoing through the marble halls, and the elite of fashion and fame sipping champagne beneath seven-figure art. This was where reputations were built and broken with a glance. And now all glances were landing on Sarai Jordan. As she stepped into the grand atrium, a hush fell. Conversation stalled. Eyes trailed her, mouths parted slightly in recognition and disbelief. She wasn't wearing someone's vision. She was the vision. A museum curator blinked at her gown, muttering, "That's not a dress. That's a movement." A celebrity makeup artist nearby whispered, "She just rewrote the night's entire theme." Sarai didn't rush. She moved like she'd been there before. Not out of arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who'd worked in the shadows for years and finally stood in the light. And then came the moment that sealed her legacy. Marcella DuPont, still radiant under camera flashes, lifted her champagne flute and tapped the crystal with the edge of her ring. The soft chime rang through the hall like a royal bell. "I'd like to acknowledge someone," Marcella said, voice echoing over the crowd. "A woman whose artistry tonight reminded us what the Met Gala is truly about. Bold vision, daring craftsmanship, and cultural storytelling." Every neck turned toward Sarai. Marcella continued, "Sarai Jordan has shown us that fashion isn't always found in ateliers and runways. Sometimes it's born in silence, in struggle, in brilliance that refuses to be ignored." Applause erupted. Not polite, not restrained, thunderous. A designer 3 tables over stood and clapped, then a model, then an actor. Within seconds, half the room was on its feet. Tears welled in Sarai's eyes, but none fell. Not tonight, because this wasn't about validation. It was vindication. The girl who once sewed in the dark by candlelight was now standing in the brightest room in the world, not as a +1 or a hopeful, but as the future of fashion. By dawn, Sarai Jordan was a household name. Her entrance, once nearly blocked by security, had now become the defining moment of the Met Gala. Fashion blogs called it a modern Cinderella story, except she didn't need a fairy godmother. TikTok stitched her walk into slow-motion montages with gospel choirs behind them. Vogue released a special headline, "Uninvited, unstoppable, unforgettable." But for Sarai, the whirlwind had only just begun. The morning after, her phone was a war zone of notifications, 37 missed calls, hundreds of DMS emails from stylists, press outlets, even brand executives who once ignored her. Offers for interviews, features, partnerships, all flooding in from the very industry that had once turned its back. And sitting on her chipped kitchen counter back in Bed-Stuy was her sewing machine, the same one she'd used to build her empire in silence. It hummed softly as she ran her fingers along it, remembering the nights she'd worked with numb fingers and nothing but faith. Then came the biggest email of them all. Subject: the Paris Atelier would like to collaborate. The message was from Marcella DuPont herself, offering Sarai a co-designer seat at Fashion Week in Paris. Not as an intern, not as a behind-the-scenes ghost, but as a headliner. She didn't cry, not this time. Instead, Sarai stepped out into the Brooklyn morning sun, coffee in hand, satin scarf wrapped around her hair. On the corner, a teenage girl nudged her friend and whispered, "That's her. That's Sarai Jordan." Sarai turned and smiled, because this was why she did it. Not for the claps, not for the camera flashes, but for the girls watching. The girls stitching their dreams in quiet rooms. The ones told they weren't invited, weren't enough, didn't belong. She'd cracked the gates open. Now she was kicking them down, and the message was clear. You can't blacklist brilliance. You can't escort power off a carpet. And you definitely can't silence a name the world is already chanting. Sarai Jordan had arrived, and fashion would never be the same. They tried to escort her out, not knowing she was the reason the night would be remembered. Sarai Jordan didn't just make a statement, she became the statement. So to every dreamer, every outsider, every underestimated soul, walk in anyway. Because when your purpose is louder than their doubt, you become the headline.